Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sara Krajewski, the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Portland Art Museum. I think in the interest of time, we'll just get started and folks can join as I'm making the introductions. I'm going to give a brief visual description. I am a white woman with long, straight brown hair pulled back into a loose bun. Tonight, I'm wearing my pink reading glasses and a black t-shirt with a gray sweater. I'm in my home office with art and books positioned behind me. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussion around art in public. Not public art per se, but art that exists in our public spaces, such as murals, pop-up exhibitions, protest art, and more. During the summer of 2020, Portland experienced a groundswell of this work in response to the racial justice uprising following several documented murders of Black people at the hands of police and others. Tonight, we will hear from 3 artists and activists who were on the ground making, documenting, and preserving this important art in public. Intisar Abioto, P Lambert, and Tai Carpenter. This is really just a scratch of the surface of what is happening with art and protest, and I thank our 3 panelists for helping us to get this conversation started. Even though we are gathering in a virtual space, we are here under the auspices of the Portland Art Museum, and I want to take a moment to recognize and honor the Indigenous people of this region on whose ancestral lands the museum now stands. These include the Willamette Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Molalla, Multnomah, and Watlala Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and many other Native communities who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully honor and acknowledge all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to offer my thanks to Pam Contemporary Art Council volunteer board member Stephen Herrera for suggesting, advocating for, and assisting with tonight's program. If you're joining as a council member, thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you're a guest tonight and you like the program, I hope you will check out our membership program. The councils at the Portland Art Museum are membership affinity groups that support the curators in our program areas. We have a lot of amazing work to hear about tonight, so let me just briefly introduce our panelists. Intisar Abioto is an artist working across photography, dance, and writing, moving from the visionary and embodied root of Black girl Southern cross-temporal, cross-modal storytelling ways. Her work refers to the living breadth of people of African descent against the expanse of their storied, geographic, and imaginative landscapes. Abioto works in long-form projects that encompass the visual, folkloric, documentary, and performing arts. And with the 5 women artists in her family, she is the co-founder of Studio Abioto, a multivalent creative arts studio. P Lambert has called Portland his home for the last 5 years. During this time, his work has appeared in public platforms from the 2018 Nike Bike Town Design Challenge to mural collaborations in response to our city's reckoning with police violence, COVID-19, systemic racism, and politics at large. Donating and selling work to benefit several organizations in our community and beyond, Lambert readily contributes to efforts that recognize the importance of the arts in combating the negative forces impacting our most vulnerable communities. Tai Carpenter is a freelance writer and organizer, primarily working within the spaces of music, art, and social justice. She is currently serving as board president of Don't Shoot Portland, a civil rights nonprofit that uses art and education to promote social change. She is also the founder of Compose Yourself magazine, an online publication showcasing independent artists, music, culture, and activism. Now, folks, if you have questions for the panelists, please post them in the Q&A, and we will get to them in our discussion to follow the presentations, and that will be led by Sharita Towne. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the screen sharing over to Intisar for her presentation.
Okay, yes, all right, thank you. Yes, so I'm just gonna go through a couple of slides. I'm an artist here in the city. I've been living here around 11 years. I'm originally from Tennessee, from Memphis. And as an artist, I mean, this is only a little blip of things, but I'm primarily focused on documentation and engagement with people of African descent here in Portland, elsewhere in the States, and everywhere that we are. So these are a few images that were taken in Portland the past, I guess, 7 or 8 years. And I, like other photographers and other Black photographers in the region, spent time last year documenting everything that was happening. So I have a lot of slides, so I won't talk about them in too much detail, but this is from a march on on Grand Avenue. So just documenting this man here. This was off of Mississippi, this like family. This was outside of Pioneer Square, this young man and who had on his respirator. And so a lot of my work, honestly, my photography is outside. It's like in the public space. It often involves engaging engaging people in public space, like streets, like talking to people, conversations. And so I've been this is that same night at Pioneer Square. So a lot of my work is in the public space, like thinking about like movement, and also I would say like the movement of people of African descent across space, like across this city. And we know the history of this place with the exclusion laws and the history of displacement. So I kind of think of my work as a long archive, like I'm building a long archive of Black life that is contributing to all the storytellers, all the people who've been who have been focusing on us, who have been documenting and telling our stories. I'm just one, but from the place that I exist in the world, I know that what I see will be unique. So that documentation, and then as I built this archive, then it becomes possible for me to share it and also affect public space in terms of our minds, in terms of information, in terms of our hearts even. And so this is a mural. I won't talk about this one long, but this is a mural that I put up last August with some support of Forest for the Trees. They do a lot of public like support for public like murals. And so this one was in the midst of everything that was happening, and I just wanted to focus on creating some space in the on the street. So this was on Grand and Ash. But yeah, so this focused on Black women here in Portland and Black women in my family. So I think also, we're celebrating Black life. And that in the midst of the protest, it was important to me to just celebrate Black women, for all we've done, all we've continued to do. So yes, what is a thing of beauty if not us? That's a public, like a poet, Samia Bashir. But I won't talk about this one too long because I have a few more. This is just some of the documentation of that, of the process of putting it up. Just thinking about things from a Black girl, from a Black woman's perspective, in terms of our thoughts and our dreams. And so the next work that I have, I put up a piece that was in response to, let me check the time here, to some pushback from the implementation of the Oregon CARES Act, which was a fund that was a part of the, let's see here, I wrote it down. So yes, it was from the U.S. Yeah, like the U.S. Treasury's like the disbursement of the coronavirus relief fund, and so there were people in the community also with the state who worked to have some of those funds be directed towards the Black community. We already know that that we have historically had less access to government funds, so they worked to make let's see, 62 million available for Black individuals, families, nonprofits, and businesses, just to survive throughout the pandemic. And in response to that, some companies, a few companies, I think maybe two, one was like a logging company based out in the state, brought suit. There was a business in downtown Portland, a coffee shop that was run by a Mexican American woman who brought suit against this. And so I felt some kind of way about that, especially I think maybe, honestly, I wasn't surprised with it coming from some white men out in the state of Oregon, but from another woman of color, a business owner. I had some challenges with that. Well, I had challenges, but so for me, I am a researcher and I'm always thinking about the experiences of Black people worldwide. I mean, it's interconnected. So for me, I had to look at the experiences of people of African descent in MEXICO. I study you all, so sometimes it'll take a second or I have to spell it, but it's coming. Let me check the time. Yeah, so I mean, like people of African descent in there in MEXICO, yeah, they had not been on the census. I believe they just got on the census maybe 2020, so they didn't even have like if you're not on a census, you don't even have funds like funds ALLOCATED to your community. So so I just had to compare this. We're thinking about, also in the census that it was supposed to be around 2% of people of African descent in Mexico. There's 2% people of African descent here. So I compared Albina to Guerrero, Vanport to Mandinga, these different communities. And I reached out to the estate of a Black photographer named Tony Gleeden to inquire about using his photographs in this installation that I mounted with the assistance of some other people that I reached out into in the community, in this installation in the windows of the business that brought suit against the Oregon CARES Fund. So if we look here to the left, you see this woman here, you see my hands on that print. So yeah, I got their permission to do that. I also included quotes from Black Portlanders. I included quotes from Mexicans, just to bring, you can bring things to court. But art also has a place in activism and engagement and how we think about things. So I know my time is getting short, so I'm just gonna click through these last images. This is the process. Some different community members came out, and we put the work in this windows of this business. And that's the book of Tony Gleedon. Yes, our history was erased for centuries, so people think we don't exist. We exist, we're here. Those are the words of an Afro-Mexican. And that it feels, those could also be the words of Black Portlanders. So yes, to the left is an Afro-Mexican, to the right is a man, is a photograph of a man I took a picture of out in Pendleton, Oregon. So this is just the panorama of that. So these last images, photographs I took last year, once again, taking photographs in the public space and then revolving them in the public space. This are a few last images of an installation I did with support of Nat Turner Project that included images from my archive, images taken last year during the different protests, and works from the Rutherford Black newspaper collection that's at PSU. So yes, that yeah, so just different ways of kind of like circulating the archive. Thank you all so much.
And next we'll hear from Sean Lambert. Sean?
Great, thank you. And thank you, Intisar, for those beautiful photos, as well as Tai Carpenter, Sharita Towne, Sarah, and Stephen for helping with all of this. I'm so excited to speak to our work and just share and kind of showcase not only my motivations, but kind of the background and my experiences as an artist creating these social justice murals, throughout Portland. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this one was the first mural I created, and this was with Lambtown 42, and we came together because a friend asked me if this was my street art account, Lambtown 42, because mine is lambskins, and I said no, it's not mine. So then I was curious as to who this person was, and I met up with Lambtown 42, and we started chatting. And then when the pandemic hit, he was approached by some landlords that he knew to do these murals, and he asked me if I wanted to participate, if we do a collaboration, basically. So I said, well, I'm not really a muralist by trade. And he said, well, I'm not an artist. So he said, perfect. So it was a no pressure situation. And we were just here to kind of put like a visual Band-Aid to help kind of beautify some of these boarded up storefronts in Portland, and do that work together and collaborate and see where we went artistically. So this one is on North Mississippi Ave. And you'll notice there's images of Hedy Lamarr and a figure that I created, which I call Judy. And she is recurring throughout a lot of the work that I do. And then Lambtown 42 just handed over the Hedy Lamarr stencil to me because he had to do other work. And then he said, go for it. So then I utilized that stencil and I created this. And this was on, April the 22nd. So you can see it's a little bit rainy. And this was the first attempt. And we said, great. And again, with a lot of these murals that started popping up, We weren't receiving payment. This was just kind of artists taking some initiative, utilizing whatever skills we had to, attempt to help our city through the pandemic. We didn't know how long the pandemic would last. We didn't know all of the restrictions, everything that was in store. So next slide, please. So this one was followed about a week later, and we started working with a lamb kind of theme due to not only our Instagram handles, but just the imagery itself and what a lamb represents, whether that's like a lamb to the slaughter or it's a lamb of God. You kind of have this idea of caught up in that animal and that symbolism and what that represents. And then I started taking more of a kind of constructivist approach to these compositions. And once again, Lambtown 42 handed me the stencils and I just kind of went to work. He had other obligations, so I could utilize his imagery and build it out as I saw fit. And then you'll notice on the top of this building, this was a business, independent business, and they had a fleur-de-lis, and I'm of French descent, so that was meaningful to me as well. And it just kind of tied into the the whole composition. And this business was boarded up. They later reopened. Now they've closed down again. So you can see this is the cycle that a lot of these retailers had been struggling, and they just wanted to protect their businesses and help make the city look a little bit better as we work through this. Next slide, please. Again, you'll see here, and the dates are very important. That's why I put them down. So this is May the 5th. More lambs, but then I started incorporating a wolf theme, because it was the lambs and the wolves, because what we were feeling at this time in our city, we had a huge spotlight on us as well as nationally, because we were approaching the elections, and there was a lot of back and forth between not only protesters and police, but also just people who were struggling and trying to make sense of what was happening. And our art, albeit, just using kind of these animal themes at this point, was trying to express not only a certain level of vitality, but also this idea of what are we walking into, where are we being led, and then who are these wolves? Even though a wolf as a predator represents many things, because it also balances an ecosystem, but playing with those types of symbols, playing with those animals, building out these compositions when we were given the opportunity to do so, kind of felt gratifying, because as artists, it's like we want to help our community, we want to participate, and we also want these businesses to survive. And so we were doing whatever we could at that point when given the opportunity. And I feel like it was not only me, it was many different artists at large who were doing many different works all across, and I would encounter them, we would talk, we would network, we would collaborate. And so it was this entire community, this wellspring that was coming together to try to address what was happening in our city. Next slide, please. Okay, and this was on 510. So this one was really, I was trying to address, and this is at Fuse Bar, this is downtown. So this is right by Voodoo Donuts. So there's a lot of foot traffic down there, a lot of tourists that come in. And this was before art, right? And then after art. So this bar was all closed down, and I reached out to them through a contact that I had in the business community and said, hey, we're doing this, can we help you out? And he was able to cover cost of our materials. And then we started incorporating different themes. So you'll notice this picture, this is of Pam Greer, who's an iconic, African-American artist, of film and in the cinema and in a lot of those blaxploitation movies. And I just really was drawn to the power of the image, the gaze, the fact that we could put that on there. And she looks defiant, she looks confident, and kind of gives this level of imagery that I was drawn to. And I said, you know what, this is a wonderful person to kind of showcase in what she represents. And then we also have Sugar Ray Robinson, the boxer. You can kind of see that in the lower left-hand corner. And this is when I really dug into a constructivist approach, where I was leaving a lot of negative space in the background, using a lot of color, but it kind of differentiates from what other muralists were doing, because we're not trying to fill up all the space. We're letting it breathe. And so people are kind of drawn to that negative space, that white space with the high contrast of the image. And this is brushwork. This is, spray paint. These circles, you'll notice I used 33 vinyl record and a 45. So those were my templates. So it's like a 12-inch and what is that, 8-inch, 7-inch, I think the 45 is. So, and repeating those patterns and drawing out the composition so it stretches over the entire, facade of the building. And this was one of my favorites that I was able to do. And the owner was, of course, very appreciative. And I was able to form a relationship with him and kind of, show what we could do as artists again to assist these businesses in a time of struggle. Next slide, please. Okay, this is 5/24 when we did this one. And this was, again, another collaboration with Lambtown 42. We're deciding what kind of imagery we're going to use. So we have Miles Davis as an iconic musician. We're both jazz fans. And I love this idea of him, blowing his horn and having all of that energy come out. And all of that's, trying to represent sound and kind of fury and whatever he's expressing musically and whatever he did to kind of revolutionize and not only music, but how he responded to a lot of the social issues that he was dealing with at that point. And you can see there's some Mick Jagger images up there too. So we were kind of going old school. And then we threw in some mixed media stuff. So we put on like oversized dollar bills, and we put on different printouts of maps. So we tried to draw in different elements to what this composition was. We kept going with the Lamb theme. And then there was D Nice. You can see him. He's the DJ there. And he was doing those live Instagram shows where he's just DJing for an hour. And when we were all locked up in our houses and we're trying to get through things, you could put on D Nice, and who was tuning in? Everybody from like, Michelle Obama to Shaka Khan to Grace Slick. It was incredible. Everybody's kind of listening to him. So that was something to look forward to almost every day, to whatever he was playing. And it was kind of like a reason to celebrate and have a little joy amidst all the difficulties that we were encountering. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was a little bit later, and this was after George Floyd was killed. And we as artists couldn't help but respond to that. And we saw how much that impacted everyone. And that became a catalyst for artistic expression, for showcasing the frustration visually. And all of a sudden, not only did our murals start to turn, but I saw everybody else around in the city, because no longer was it really just about us having to stay inside to be safe. It was considering the safety of, people who were not in power, people who were being killed by police, and drawing attention to what was happening in our country at large. And so Lambtown 42 made this stencil of George Floyd, and he's made many others of, folks who were killed by police, and has taken it upon himself to go to a lot of electrical boxes throughout town and spray paint those so there's representation. And so those folks are not forgotten. And you can see them from downtown all over. So again, he lent me that stencil, and I used that at the very far end of this particular piece. And this is a store, it's Under You for Men, and this is a gay-owned business. And I know the owner, Stephen, and he called me up and he was in tears because his business was, windows were smashed. He was sitting inside when this happened because there was people breaking into these businesses, and he was just trying to maintain. And he had to put up all these boards over his building. And he said, Sean, can you come in here? Can you just do this? Can you paint something? Because I want to show my support, but I also don't want to be robbed. I don't want people hurting my business. So I got down there and I ended up doing this. This stretched for about half a block, his business. And I did this all in one day. I whitewashed the boards. I took the George Floyd stencil. I utilized that. I created a bunch of my own stencils. And then I tried to draw a parallel between, the gay community and kind of their struggle and what they've encountered, and how they had to also fight for their civil rights, and how that is still an ongoing issue, and how that kind of dovetails with, what the Black community is feeling, and kind of what we're all feeling to help elevate the voices and to see those people who need our assistance, who need justice, and how that works over time. So then I got some coverage. Oh, that's fine. There you go. I got a little coverage from Coin. So I did a little interview with them where they asked me about, what happened with Under You for Men. And that kind of was phrased as a place of healing, but it was also a place of protest, because it wasn't just healing. I was feeling angry about this, and I'm sure a lot of people were feeling angry. And this was a way that I could express myself. And then it was great to get that kind of light, but I really wanted to express that I was just one of many people who were responding to this, and many different artists who were putting forth their time, their effort, their money to do this, who weren't necessarily getting paid, because we felt a responsibility towards our city and towards our friends and family, and to those who have been on the receiving end of racism by the police, on all the social injustice that have been mounting, and kind of came to a head. So then, as I was doing a lot of these murals, it started influencing the work that I was doing in my studio. So I started utilizing kind of the stencils that I was putting outside, and I started putting them inside, and I created a wealth of work when I couldn't be outside doing murals that I just did, works on paper, works on canvas, where I started utilizing more of a constructivist approach. And it was interesting for me as an artist to see how one kind of fit with the other. All right, next slide, please. Well, this one was, again, another person who was killed by the police, and this is Elijah McLean. And Lambtown 42 created this stencil, and this was heartbreaking, because you saw a lot of the footage of him as a 23-year-old, kid, basically, who was a sensitive soul, who played the violin to cats who did nothing wrong, who might have been didn't deserve this. And the fact that he was forcibly injected with ketamine, which induced a heart attack, which killed him, was awful. And we felt the need to at least express that. And then, through our artwork. So we did this, again, a collaborative effort. And then when we finished this one, it was just around the corner. We were told that there was a vacant storefront, and that was boarded up, and could we do another mural there? This was all on the same day. So next slide, please. And we got to that, and we were already pretty exhausted from doing the first one, but we said, you know what? Let's approach this like a punk song, and we'll just go in there, and we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna have energy. We're going to put our stencils down there. We're going to showcase everything that we got. We're going to put George Floyd there. We're going to put Pam Greer. We have Obama in there. We have lambs. We have visions of eagles and baseball players, an outline of the continental US. And we had finished this one in under 2 hours. And it was just, again, kind of all that mounting frustration and just putting it out on those boards for people to see. And the other artists that we were working with, we covered that entire block, and that's right around Pioneer Square. So not far from like the Apple Store, not far from the Pioneer Mall, where you had kind of an outdoor gallery. Many of these pieces that I'm showing here, they're not even there anymore. Some of them we were able to retain, other ones have just been graffitied over, other ones have been removed. And unfortunately, that's the fate of a lot of these pieces that have been created. So it's really been my aim to try to preserve, to try to showcase, and Ty's going to speak more to this and her preservation efforts that she did with Don't Shoot PDX to save the ones that were on the front of the Apple building. Next slide, please. And this is the last one that I did. And this one was in January. And again, with Lambtown 42. And we got contacted by another landlord and said, hey, we got this space. Can you come out and do something? So we said, sure. And we did another Miles Davis effort. And I'm happy to say I live in this neighborhood, and I haven't seen anybody's touched this one. It's gone unmolested. And this is a piece we were particularly proud of, just because we had done so much, and we got to this point where we're like, you know what, can we do a reflective, it's not quite celebratory, but just kind of contemplative image of, you know, Miles Davis as this great jazz innovator and creator, and help, again, beautify my neighborhood that I live in, and just feel good about maybe what the future may bring and what the hope may bring and what artists are producing and what we'll continue to produce. Because regardless of whether the galleries are open, the museums are open, guess what? Artists are always open, and we're always going to be doing this work. And whether or not we have a forum, we're going to be doing it in our studios, we're going to be doing it on the streets, we're going to be posting online, we're going to be sharing with each other, trying to gather strength from our community and doing work that is relevant, and it's not ephemeral, it's evolving. And that's what we wanted to showcase. And I just want to say to all the other artists and people who are supporting us out there and who see the work in Portland, you know, thank you so much. And please look for us and support us. And we'll continue to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So I'm gonna just jump into my presentation. My name is Tai Carpenter. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm currently serving as the board president of Don't Shoot Portland. So I wanted to backtrack some of the work that we've done to the last project that we did with the Portland Art Museum, actually. I hope that everyone can, the ASL, okay. This was actually part of our Liberated Archives. It was an installation at Pam during the Hank Willis Thomas exhibition, which was shown upstairs across from Hank's appropriation of Picasso's Guernica. We also decided to remake it as part of our ongoing Liberated Archives program series. And the work is made up of archival maps depicting color lines throughout Portland, and then collaged with photos from a decade of protests in support of families who have lost loved ones to gun violence. And this was in January 2020, just before the pandemic. And as fortunate as I've been to travel for work, covering various event fairs in the art world, coming back to Portland, which was right before the pandemic, it was extremely eye-opening for me in realizing that, you know, it's essential to connect creatives to resources and opportunities. And in a small city like Portland, I've seen the difficulty in gaining genuine recognition, especially as Black artists, unless they've been previously vetted or deemed necessary for whatever performative action the institution or supporter deems fit. And that support is usually not intended to sustain the artist, but rather the supporter or the institution. So my hope is that in my work, I can continue to advocate for social justice in art. And I think one way of doing that is by facilitating these dialogues in a way that's constructive and intentional, and not just for display purposes. This is an image from our annual Juneteenth programming. It usually takes the form of a week-long event series that centers children in art as part of our Children's Art and Social Justice Council. Following our Portland Art Museum installation I just showed, we were able to host a pop-up Freedom Lemonade store where everything was free to youth organizers, whether those were materials to make art or resources to make their voices heard at the protest. We were able to support a lot of on-the-ground movements this way, and these signs that you see in the photo, the colorful banners, A fine artist volunteered by hand painting those banners based on the slogans of the civil rights movement and Hank Willis Thomas's I Am Amen series. And with the children leading this march, as they do every year, with their own art and their banner projects, we celebrated Black emancipation in June 2020, right when everything had erupted. Another image here. All of these images are by Mika Martinez, a local photographer that we've worked with quite a bit. And now I'm going to go into our preservation of the Apple murals at the Pioneer Place. When last year's movement for Black Lives reignited, I was hit with a surge of trauma every time I opened my social media to see another person lost to police violence resembling a family member. Having just moved back to a city that is so in favor of white supremacy like Portland, it was honestly hard for me to feel safe at first. And when the murals began appearing all over the city, it was the first time I felt an immersive art environment in Portland. The energy felt like community and trust. I'm sure there are some businesses who even wanted to have murals and probably commissioned some artists to express themselves on their storefront. But there's also a performative facet to that. Businesses that have never shown up to support human rights began seeking these artists' work in order to align themselves with the movement, at least temporarily, mostly in a disjointed effort to protect their property. Don't Shoot Portland is actually an arts and education organization. So when we facilitated and negotiated the preservation of the Apple Store memorial panels, it took months of back and forth Zoom calls and meetings between both of our legal teams. Being part of that process in general and learning the legal intricacies and conservation techniques that came along with it was rewarding, but having to articulate the distinction between city-sanctioned murals and the artistic response of so many during a civil uprising is something that can't be undervalued. Most of these calls weren't easy, but they were necessary. We had to direct this process ourselves. These were not just wooden panels that could be taken down and dropped off in someone's apartment or placed in a park for someone to visit whenever they needed to renew their commitment to racial justice. I'm grateful to have built upon my experience in preservation and archivism through this project and to keep these stored in the meantime. Working together with the Transpac team and seeing the amount of care and consideration they put in taking these boards down was beautiful in itself. All of these photos were also taken by Mika Martinez. So I just wanted to share these with you. There's quite a few, so I'll click through them here. But yeah, this was a collaborative art project. There was several individuals involved with this, many. And this is at the Transpac facility in Tualatin, where we assisted them in creating the custom made crates for each panel. I believe there were 16 of these large crates total that they custom fit for the sizing. We also saved every single cardboard box, every cardboard sign, every candle, every rose petal. Yeah. And then this is a photo of our latest exhibit. This was in August 2021 at Holding Contemporary. It's part of our Liberated Archives programming, and we do it every year, basically to bring historical context to the forefront in order to showcase our fight against current systems. I believe archivism forces you to recognize and reckon with how systemic racism and discrimination truly is. And part of our installation Withholding this year wanted to focus on that. It was called Archives for Black Lives, a Liberated Archives exhibition. We created a vinyl wallpaper out of a 192-page petition. Let me see if I can get a closer look of that. Of a 192-page petition filed to Portland City Commissioners in 1940. Demanding the refusal of a Black settlement in the Albina neighborhood. The wallpaper also contained Portland Council meeting minutes, city club reports, and sensationalized racist headlines from prominent Oregon papers at the time. I think showcasing these types of documents clearly demonstrates the oppressive foundation of American policy when it comes to the populations it considers disposable. History can show us exactly how we arrived at our current systems of redlining, mass surveillance, and the over-policing and criminalization of Black and Brown families. I hope that we can continue to use our programming and community action plan at large to push forward social change. I plan to keep elevating honest discussions about racism, activism, and art in America. thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Intisar, Sean, and Tai, for your presentations tonight. So much to learn and to revisit. So I really appreciate you spending the time to go back over a very difficult year and a half. Now I would like to introduce Sharita Towne, who will lead our discussion. Sharita is a multidisciplinary artist and educator based in Portland. Born and raised on the west coast of the US along Interstate 5 from Salem, Oregon to Tacoma, Washington, and down to Sacramento, California. She's most interested in engaging local and global Black geographies, histories, and possibilities. In her work, a shared art penetrates and binds people, artists, audience, organizers, civic structures, sisters, cousins, and landscape in collective catharsis, grief, and joy. Sharita holds a BA from UC Berkeley and an MFA from Portland State University, and her work has received support from many organizations and foundations. And most recently, she was awarded the Fields Artist Fellowship by Oregon Humanities and the Oregon Community Foundation. I hope you all will come by the museum soon to see Sharita's current Apex exhibition, Sharita Towne and a Black Art Ecology of Portland. So thank you all so much. Please enter questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will try to get to those shortly. So hand it off to you, Sharita.
Okay, thank you for that intro. Long bios are always a little bit awkward, so thank you everybody for sitting through that. Okay, so I'm going to ask a singular question to each person that presented based on the notes that I've taken, and then I'll ask a question that kind of unites everyone that I'm curious about. And I hope that people will just start typing their questions, because we do want to field some audience questions with the time that we have. So let's all kind of do the work of generating thoughtful questions. So my first question is for Intisar. It's so impressive, the this kind of seamless feast that is the way that you take from the public space and give back to the public space. It's just, I've loved seeing it for years. And I'm really curious about your selection process. And with this projects where you're showing kind of interconnectedness between different places, thinking about a place like Mexico and, La Tercera Raíz, the third root, only in the 1990s did Mexico acknowledge Black people. And then it took 20 years for them to acknowledge them in the census. And also here in Portland, only into the 1990s did Portland acknowledge redlining in Portland. And then it took another 20 years for them to actually start to think about giving some of that land back, thinking about the Emmanuel Hospital theft of Black homes, right? So those things are so aligned. And so I really appreciate the interconnectedness. And so thinking about that poetic of giving and taking back and thinking about audience, I'm really curious about the word protection. Like what and who do you find yourself protecting through the times, and what narratives? I love seeing the celebration, and it's the celebration is so clear, but there's also such a quiet protection as well. And I would like you to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks. That's so huge. Well, I had this body of work. I started taking pictures when I was 14, so that's about 21 years. And I think purposefully taking pictures of, actually I was probably since I was my late teens, kind of thinking, okay, this is what I want to do, documenting Black people across the diaspora. And I'm still learning. I think you just keep going, and but I hope, I very much want caretaking to be a part of my process, that these images, they are touchstones, they are references to something and people much greater. like the photographs are, you know, they're great. I love them. I like photography, you know, but it's just like a reference to us. It's a reference to our communities, and in how I plan and desire and hope for the images to be held in the world by myself and others. I hope they're held in a capacity as like so many of us are working and have been working for Black people to be loved, taken care of in community. I mean, we've been doing that ourselves. And so yes, that extends to like how we engage, or how I try to engage in the documentation process, and how I who has access to the photos, for what reason, you know, like people often make image requests for different things or different kinds of usage, and you know, often it's no. You know, like yeah, so my hope is that the images are able to offer the energy of us back to us. Yes.
I typed yes enthusiastically to what you're saying, and then right then you said yes at the same time. That was really nice.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So my next question is for Sean, also thinking along the lines of protection. One of the first things that you said was a visual Band-Aid. And, you know, you talked about developing these relationships with business owners. And so it's interesting to hear Intisar talk about like protecting the sanctity of Black life and the agency of saying yes or no to certain, you know, uses of those images. And I'm interested in what, aside from protecting private property and developers' interests and, you know, business owners and things like that, what are you interested in protecting in your images? And have you considered how the work that you do, like what is its next life, and how does that breathe life back into, you know, Black art ecologies and Black people and the sanctity of Black life?
Yeah, when we approach those things, it's with a certain level of thoughtfulness, because to me, images have power, you know, and whether they are literal or whether they whatever they evoke in the viewer, it's like once you release those images into the world, or whether they're recycled or they're put on the side of a building or you see them on your phone, it's what does that evoke? What does that mean? Why are you utilizing them? And oftentimes with these businesses, we would have them say, well, this happened to us several times. We don't want anything quote unquote political, right? What does that mean? That means you don't want anything that's a Black Lives Matter. You don't want anything that might be on the side of, hey, we're trying to support social justice. So a lot of the murals that you also saw had nothing to do with anything, right? And it was just, to me, it was putting on a coat of paint on something. And when I say a visual Band-Aid, it's because it doesn't solve the problem, but it might help to stop a little bit of the bleeding, you know, functioning.
Can you say like what the bleeding is there?
The bleeding in the sense of we're showcasing not only images of, you know, people who were killed by police to, you know, elevate that story, to try and showcase the kind of racism and the violence that exists not only in our city, but beyond. But also try to bring more light to what we're trying to do, not only as artists, but as people, to help further, you know, our goals in terms of having people be on the same page in terms of taking care of each other, in terms of respecting each other, in terms of promoting positive dialogue, in terms of addressing policy, all these things that contribute to the terrible things that we've witnessed over the last year and a half stretching back many, many years in this country, and also where we are going from here. So as an artist, it's like, I do a lot of abstract work, right? But then it's like I delve into imagery more in the public sphere, because imagery can resonate in ways that abstract can't. And in playing with that and seeing how that works as an artist, and where I can put that in these public spaces that people are able to see, because you can't go to the museums, you can't go to the galleries. So it's a responsibility, but it's also kind of a drive that I have to help my city and to help folks that are affected by all of these negative forces.
Thank you. All right, Tai, here's my question for you. So I think I'm really interested in, to contrast the way that Sean's talking about, as an artist and a singular artist that works with business owners and different people to kind of have a certain kind of catharsis through these abstract images. You and the organization that you work with works with so many people. It's such a collective we. It's such like an extensive amount of work. And so seeing your presentation and having you distill it through connecting the Liberated Archives exhibition at Pam and then seeing at the Holding Gallery, and just thinking about how different those two spaces are and how different they are in terms of accessibility to a public. And thinking about what it means to bring stuff back out of the archives and juxtapose that with the current archives through Facebook that, y'all are actually such a big part of in your interaction in that platform, right? So it's both like an archive protection and to some degree, like bringing up archives to just tear certain narratives down and show how terrible they are, while also building new archives. And so I was hoping that you could just talk about first, kind of the difference of showing that work in January 2020 and then building on it and showing it again in 2021. And really just kind of some of the ways that you see the kind of the long-term vision of preserving things like the Apple mural. So I'm interested in that kind of time span of talking about that year difference, but also like far into the future, what feels so urgent to preserve.
Definitely, and thank you for the kind words. Yeah, I appreciate it. So the biggest difference in the January installment at the Portland Art Museum and the one at Holding definitely is in terms of the amount of support we received. Holding has been a partner with us for many years, and I think that they're pretty open with supporting our initiatives and believing in our ability as artists and doing what we want to do. Whereas when we worked at Portland Art Museum, it was more as a partner of the exhibit happening at the time. And the photo that I shared, you can see the scale of the room. We are literally above a couch and a chair. So it was a very small space that they gave us. And it was like pulling teeth just to get those images printed, and printing is such a resource. So yeah, the installation we did at Portland Art Museum was not well supported. So I think that really showed. And at Holding, that was the, just the result of working with the Portland Archives and the archivists there for so many years. We do normal programming with them, and we usually bring students there and like children, youth. But when COVID happened, we weren't able to be in the archives, and we still aren't able to really be in the archives. So that's why there was such a gap between the installations. But archivism is so powerful to me, and it really, it allows you to protest without being gaslit. It allows you to express why you're still trying to dismantle and why it's worth doing, because when you see from the root how these policies were created for your detriment, I mean, it's hard to ignore that. There's no bias built upon that because the language is the language of the oppressor. How do you really escape that? So at Holding, we were able to put the writing on the walls, and yeah, just being able to do that and hold space and take up space in a way that is like supported makes such a difference. And that goes into like state sanctioned or city sanctioned murals and people that commission because they're, you know, in a disjointed effort to minimize their property damage. You know, I've kept track of how many businesses threw Black Lives Matter signs and things on their windows, and I don't see them now, of course. You know, I've paid attention to that. And I think that's also, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to try to take up space. And also that comes at a cost and a compromise at times. But at the end of the day, I think by investing your time and energy and effort, you are also investing in whatever that person is paying you to be a part of. So that's kind of where I stand on it. You can't control art. So we do a lot of unsanctioned, unpermitted things, and that's just what it is. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think with the nature of my rambly questions, because that's where I'm at right now, I'm just gonna go straight to the audience questions because I think they're really lovely. So one of the first questions we got was, I wonder what Tai and Intisar would like to be seen done with the empty plinths and the South Park blocks, Jefferson High School, Mount Tabor. If y'all have any thoughts on those spaces and what you'd like to see done with them.
That's a huge conversation, but definitely one I would enjoy to have, because, you know, there's a lot of things that have been taking up space in Portland that don't deserve to be there. And yeah, I think we could use more permanent reminders of the city's roots so that we can recognize and reckon with it. And yeah, the South Park blocks, Jefferson, yeah, all of those places, they have their own things that need to be done. So another conversation, but get at me. I would love to talk.
Could you repeat the places?
Yeah, South Park blocks. So I think that's Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt statues were pulled and those plinths are there. Jefferson High School, Thomas Jefferson was taken down. And then Mount Tabor, Harvey Weinstein, is that his last name? I tried to forget his last name. He was also removed. So those three sites. So downtown, northeast, and southeast Portland, those plinths.
And then to that point, there are so many vacant spaces right now, vacant spaces that are city owned. And I would love to see a point where, you know, I know Tai and Don't Shoot PDX has been able to preserve a lot of those murals that were on the Apple Store and the ephemera and things that were left. But there's an incredible opportunity to showcase not only the murals themselves, but also the artists who created them and their motivations and, you know, their stories as well. And have a space, because for me, and this is a larger discussion, but it's affordable housing, because if you can't afford a place to live, how are you going to afford a place to work, you know? And then all of these places are open, and well, why can't we utilize them to showcase all these people who have voices, who create tremendous work that needs to be seen?
Totally. That's a good chat to have with some of these business owners. Intisar, what do you think?
To be honest, I don't quite know. Like yeah, I think like Tai said, it feels like a bigger conversation. I mean, I feel glad those things aren't there any longer. And I'm also interested in like, maybe this sounds vague, but does some, or I don't know, it's not to say that I don't think does something need to be there, but does something always need to be there? And like, I don't know, sometimes replacing things doesn't always feel like it every time. I'm unsure. Actually, I'm unsure. And I would actually, I'm more interested in the process that could come from thinking about that, and like what people could imagine into or around those spaces, or even actions that could occur, or even rituals. maybe alongside considering like standalone things. When you said the Southwest Park blocks, for a second, I thought about the Northwest Park blocks and just the Black community that was in that area. And I do know there's that Golden West kind of monument-ish, or though that like audio, but just, yeah, I feel like there's some memory engagement that could happen around actual things. Yeah, so I'm unsure, but I'm interested.
Thank you for that. Another question that we got was, are there any public pieces up now in Portland or the greater North Pacific Northwest that you're particularly hyped on? Anyone? Any public pieces that you're like, that's tight?
Personally, there's Isaka Samsudeen. He has been a longtime Portland artist. He's like a living legend to me. I look up to him and admire his work so much. But he has an exhibit currently at the Portland Art Museum, and Don't Shoot Portland just purchased the Land of the Empire Builders, which is a very large scale painting by him. And I think, to me, that's just the most beautiful purchase that could have been made. So I've been really excited about that. And you all should go and see his exhibit if you haven't already, or if you're not familiar with Isaka Samsudeen. He is my favorite Portland artist by far. So yeah, in the chat, the link is in the chat, so please make time for that.
There's a wonderful artist who goes by Jesus, Heysus, and he does a lot of stuff that's influenced by Aztec iconography. He's also a tattoo artist, and his work is all over. And I see murals and work that he does that I find absolutely fascinating, and I think he's tremendous. So whenever I see his work, I'm always drawn to it.
I think for me, I think I need a second to think on that. I might circle back.
Okay. I have another question here about Black artists coming together for kind of larger scale collaborative work. You know, this question is like 20, 30, 50 of us, by larger scale, not meaning necessarily physical size, but capacity and depth. And so that question of how can Black artists in Portland come together, I'm also curious to piggyback on it, answer that question. But, you know, what kind of experiences have you already had with lots of artists coming together, or do you know of Black artists doing that work? I know that, and on my end, I've seen a dozen or two artists work together in different projects of capacities. I know that Intisar, and I've been very humbled at certain moments to get a take witness of it, has done extensive research on generations of Black artists and Black elders coming together over time, and all the challenges that we face with certain kinds of civic support or funding or availability of space. So yeah, I guess I would just add to this question of how can Black artists in Portland come together in big numbers? Like, where have you seen in your lifetime them coming together as well, and how have you been a part of it as well?
I think for me, that question is more in terms of, like you said, we don't need, you know, grants or corporate funding or institutional funding to make that happen. I just think it's more of an organic, it needs to be more of an organic coming together, and it needs to be intentional. Because what I touched on earlier in my presentation, and what is far too real for me since moving to Portland, is, you know, people just assuming that all Black people want to work together, or just assuming that, oh, hey, do you know this person, insert Black name here. And, you know, I think that that's like, it's really hard to be in a situation like that, or to have people come together, or to like try to group you. So it depends on who's doing the grouping and what the intention is. But I think that would be beautiful. I think it's necessary. And that's what we try to do with, you know, Don't Shoot Portland's programming. We call ourselves a community action plan, because through our different art projects and our workshops, we do get some of the youth together, and they do get to learn about each other, and they get to learn about history and different leaders and scholars and educators, and not just negative reinforcement of like Black trauma and Black death. So I just miss having those in-person events and being able to connect like that, because it is needed. So yeah, thank you for that question, Silver.
I'm the art director at Sneaker Week, and this is actually how I met Tai, because I was actively trying to get murals to display as part of Sneaker Week. And I reached out to Socho, who did all the murals that were on Mother's Bistro downtown, and she put me in touch with Tai and Don't Shoot PDX. And then I was able to connect our organizations. And then Don't Shoot PDX was then in turn able to do a display as part of Sneaker Week. And of course, we have many Black artists that participate and who are at the forefront of that organization. So I felt very affirmed that we could join forces to do a display, and Tai and Don't Shoot PDX were so receptive and did such wonderful work, and it was just so affirming to see that can happen. But it really does take searching out. It really does take connecting, and again, you won't necessarily find that in the institutions, but it's knowing the artists, knowing the people who are participating, and that you're like-minded, and you can effectively join forces to bring about a greater good, greater display, showcase artists that otherwise don't have a display space.
Yeah, well, thank y'all for those answers. Yeah, I think this is another big question, thinking about the past, the present, and what we want for the future. I think Black artists do come together at different moments. I mean, there's a social capacity. I do feel connected to Black artists in the city. I know there are folks that I don't know just because I haven't met them, or they're newer to the city, or I just haven't connected with them, because sometimes people are working in pockets, and there have been Black arts groups and collaboratives here in the city, in this research I've been doing around the history and presence of Black artists here, that I started doing in 2018, when I realized that I didn't know who the Black artists were who were here, like, working during the Civil Rights Movement. Just like the Black arts movement. In the process of that, like, of interviews and hearing from this person and who would recommend you to this person, I was able to find out that there were several Black arts groups operating here in the 80s, Black Artists Guild, and Members Gallery and Kusasa, different ones. And then also, several years ago, there was BCC Brown Hall, a group of Black artists who were working here. And often, when some of these groups, they don't always continue to operate, but the connections made through them forge a foundation for continuing questions, inquiry, work, community support. I know even this past year, there was a group of Black artists who came together to consider what would happen to some of the panels around the city as well. I feel, but I don't know. I feel it's so complex, because I think there's ways you can gather in body, but I also think there's ways you can gather in spirit with Black artists of the past, and the work that they were doing, and through that, to draw energy and force and more insight and capacity and skill. I really appreciate a lot of the things you were talking about, Tai, around the importance of the archive, and not being gaslit, or I'm not sure. I think you said that, or someone said that. Sorry, my brain is weird sometimes these days. But yeah, if even that idea that there haven't been Black artists here, there's been Black artists, or like there not being Black people here, that there wouldn't be Black artists here, that there wouldn't be Black people doing any kind of thing here. But spending time in archives, both here in the city, but at other institutions outside of this state, like looking into the history of artists like Charlotte Lewis or Thelma Johnson Street or Asaka Shamsuddin, seeing their impact over the years is a gathering to me of spirit and force and encouragement. And so there's that. And then I think of Nat Turner Project, who's done a lot of gathering, creating spaces for Black and Black and BIPOC artists. There are different ways to gather, also to celebrate. Since I started that research, I envisioned a series of dinners with Black artists and a retreat for Black artists, and I slowly developed it, and I applied for a Creative Heights grant recently and received it. So I'll be working collectively with Black artists to envision what that will be, and in the imaginative and planning kind of mindset of what other kind of gatherings do we want to have. So yeah, let's see. I think we have come together, and we will come together, while also making space for all the ways that we are different, that we don't always have to know everybody, sometimes you won't know everybody. But yeah.
Thank you for that. I think we're at about time. So I'll turn it back over to Sara, but Intisar, Tai, Sean, thank you so much for sharing your art and your hard work. I'm just very humbled to get to sit and nerd out with the three of you, and it's just so extensive. And catch me outside. I'll see you outside. I'll see you outside the Zoom. I can't wait to see what else you do. So thank you. And thank you, Sara, for the invitation. Thanks everyone for being here. I'll turn it over to Sara now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will just echo that. Thank you so much to the artists, Intisar, Sean, and Tai, for sharing your experiences, and to Sharita for being such a wonderful moderator and drawing out such good points from the conversation and taking it in such rich directions. So thank you to everyone who was here with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully in public, in person, in the not too distant future. So thank you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you.